How are you doing today, Nat?
Oh, good. Just got a bottle of water.
Oh, good for you, man. Always fortify that body, especially in this summer heat. Are you in a area where it's baking us?
Yes, we're about 95 degrees today in North Hollywood, jewel of the San Fernando Valley. My dog and I are sitting in front of the fan.
You know what? That's the one thing. When my daughter graduated from UCLA, we spent a lot of time out there in LA, and that's the one thing they didn't have was air conditioning units out there. I didn't ever adjust to that.
No, the other thing is the houses here were built without much insulation because who needed it? Yep. And so we find out now that all the heat is leaching out in the winter and all the air conditioning is leaching out in the summer. By the way, Ara, we spoke before. I think on the Exorcist book, yeah. And you're wonderful. I'm really, really happy we're able to connect again. So thank you very much for your interest here.
Well, what you do, Nat, is that you really dive into subjects that create, and I'm going to say this, I'm going to cross the line. You create the oh shit factor is what you do with everything that you touch, because you make me go, whoa, shit. Well, are you kidding me? I didn't know this.
5 years of being a movie publicist taught me how to look for the oh shit factor.
Where were you at when you decided, I'm going to talk about the naughty bits? Because, these are the kinds of conversations that we have when we're sitting there binge watching television shows or going to the movie. I want to know what was taken out of that, and you've got access to it.
I was writing a book on how Otto Preminger had eroded the production code by making films that he, like The Man with a Golden Arm and Advise and Consent, and how he chipped away at the code. But to do that, I was privileged to be given access to the records of the Production Code Administration by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. And after I finished the Otto book, which for those of you who are looking on Amazon.
Oh my God, you're talking about breaking the code.
Yes, I saw all these letters and they just one after the other, thousands of pages, intrigued me by the stuff that we didn't see. And it's all there. In fact, the letters themselves you probably couldn't put into a movie because they're the things that you can't put into a movie. Oh. So the naughty bits came out of it. The naughty bits is a kind of a takeoff on the Monty Python expressions. Yeah. And I picked 53 films, which were not only famous films or which outlined certain things, certain themes that I thought we would have to see that would cover different aspects of motion pictures, whether it's sexism, racism, sex perversion, which is they called homosexuality in those days, alcoholism, gambling, the whole gamut, and it's in the book.
I was in shock when I went down the list, especially of Mice and Men, a classic like this, and it had some naughty bits in it, meaning exactly the things that you were just talking about. It's like, how? I don't understand.
The people who read books are not necessarily those who go to movies. And it was a concern to the producers that the character of Lenny Small, which was played in the movie beautifully by Lon Chaney Jr., is mentally retarded. And not only, spoilers coming up, is he killed at the end by his protector, George, played by Burgess Meredith, but also there's a question about how he can be portrayed as a retarded person. Yeah. There's a subplot also where Curly, played by Bob Steele, has a wife played by Betty Field, and he keeps one hand in a glove, which has Vaseline in it, and he's saving it for his wife. So there's these things which were in the book, which had to be minimized in the film because they were considered too advanced for audiences in 1939.
One of the things that we've learned, especially in radio, is, the evil red pen. But yet you talk about the blue pencil of the Production Code Administration. I mean, I was like, I've never heard of this before.
The Production Code people, and Joe Breen in particular, were urbane, enormously well-read, very intelligent, and yet they had to enforce a code which over the years became increasingly out of step with American morals. The code was in power from 1930 and really enforced in 1934 on through 1966 and 1968. America during that period went through World War II, Korea, Vietnam, the civil rights movement, gay liberation, women's liberation, and the code was calcified into what was written in 1930. It had to change, and that's what Valenti was charged with doing when he took over the MPAA in 1966.
Dude, I am that sick guy that wakes up every morning and goes to WeTV, and I sit there and I'll watch old episodes of Jack Benny. How is it that Jack Benny got away with what he did, and yet in this book it should have been taken out?
Well, Jack Benny was doing television programming, and television was subject to a different kind of censorship. The Motion Picture Association had nothing to do with the television industry. Whoa. The TV industry was in charge of their own regulation. Sometimes the sponsors were as well. That's a whole different subject.
So when you went into a movie and you got that access to 53 different movies, did you go in there like a kid in a candy store? Because, all of a sudden, The Grapes of Wrath was right there in front of you.
It was a privilege looking at these letters. Oh. Especially because they had never been published before. I summarize a lot of them with permission, but you hear the back and forth and to see the negotiations, and it's all very, very stilted language. You know, if you follow our rules, then we will give you a code certificate. But they also have to quote the stuff that they took out, and there are some things in his girlfriend. Let me give you an example here. This is something that I should have made it into Bringing Up Baby. At the very beginning, Cary Grant is working on a brontosaurus sculpture of old bones, and his assistant, who we're given to believe is also his fiance, is a woman who's helping him. And they're trying to figure out what to do with the intercostal clavicle. And he says, why don't we try it here? Why don't we try it in the head? Why don't we try it in the tail? And she says, oh, you tried it in the tail last time and it didn't work. That's, you're talking about a particular practice between two people who are consenting. That got by. Or in His Girl Friday, there's a moment when the reporters are talking back and forth. One of them says, a woman called up, says that Earl Williams is hiding in her gazebo. The other reporter says, well, tell her to stand up. It makes no sense, but it's a wonderful moment. Or what was the name of the mayor's first wife? The one with the wart on her? Yeah, Fanny. The one with the wart on her, Fanny? That's what it comes out to with the speed of their delivery. Nobody stopped that. It's amazing the stuff they got by versus the stuff they took out.
See, I call that hidden speak. I will do that on the radio so much. I will, in my own hidden speak way, put things out there and make the listener go, did he just say what I think he just said? Well, no, he didn't, but yes, he did.
And this is why they have program directors.
That's right. So true. So true. Well, I mean, my wife and I were talking all about Eve, and I said, you're not going to believe this. I said, according to Nat here, he says they couldn't even say sex in that movie. And she looked at me and she says, I saw that movie a lot of times and nothing offended me in there. Yeah, because they took it out.
Right. That's the thing we don't even know about. That's one of the more verbal films, too, that All About Eve, when Eve says, this play is about how whether we in the South should be marrying our cousins. Mm-hmm. Well, the original word wasn't marrying, it was screwing, and they couldn't put that in. So it's these tiny little cuts, death by 1,000 cuts, that changed some of these movies into the classics we have today.
Yeah, but right away, Nat, I'm telling you, I was season 3 of The Bear, and the words that they're using, the subjects they're covering, it's like, I swear to God, these people over there with their little blue pencils would be freaking out, even with binge watching, which should be a movie anyway.
It's true. The irony of all of this, even today, when you look at an R-rated movie where you can't bring a kid in under 17 unless he or she is with a parent or adult guardian. Well, 2 weeks later, the movie is streaming and the kid is watching it upstairs in his bedroom. He's 8 years old on his cell phone. So it's strange how to have a dichotomy between what you can see in theaters and what you can see on your own by renting it or by accessing it through streaming.
Well, isn't that the reason why we got Cinemax and Showtime? Come on.
Sure. And the rest of it really comes down to whether the parents are doing their job. Yeah. It's always been that, but it's more profound now because kids can have their own television sets.
So the area that you really put a lot of focus on, 1934 to 1968. And right away, I'm having all these flashbacks of these old black and white movies. They took chances, and they weren't even speaking words. It was still the actions. Were they also covered by the blue pencil?
Everything was. You had the production code people going over the original novels or plays or magazine articles on which the films were based. They went over every version of the script, even before the scripts were finished. They went over the assembly cut of the film. They went over the costume designs. They went over the song lyrics if the song was sung in the movie. They went over the advertising, the posters, how everything was handled. The code had absolute control. And the irony is that the studios are the ones who paid the code's expenses, and they had to cotton to what the code said, even though the studios were the ones paying for it.
One of my favorite parts of the book is the transparency and the honesty that you have in the introduction. It is so shocking, so true about the layers of censorship, and yet at the same time you sit there and you go, how does this fit into our moment of now?
We have to remember that the First Amendment in the Constitution, which covers freedom of speech, applies only to the government. It doesn't apply to private organizations, which is the controversy now over YouTube and X or Twitter, whatever the hell it is, and all of the social media. They're privately owned. They can censor whomever they want. But the government cannot order this censorship, and that's part of the controversy that's ongoing now in the courts. That's why the motion picture industry set up their own censorship office rather than risk the government coming in and doing it.
I live here in the South. I know how people speak here in the South, even today. A movie like Gone with the Wind, I would love to know how much ended up on the cutting room floor.
A lot of it wasn't even filmed because it was taken out of the script beforehand. Besides, of course, the famous exit line that Rhett Butler has, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn." Yeah. There were two other elements in the film that were of particular concern. One of them was the birth of Melanie's child. George Cukor was directing that sequence before he was let go, and the industry was concerned that it was too explicit to show how much suffering. I mean, you don't even see Melanie pregnant. Just all of a sudden she's having a baby. The other thing was the sensitivity toward slavery and the African Americans. The NAACP was a consultant on some of this, and even now, the film causes quite a stir because there's the scene after Missy Scarlett is attacked on the bridge and Big Sam rescues her from all the people who were gathered, the homeless people gathered around there. And then later, of course, Rhett Butler and Ashley go out with the other menfolk and try to roust all these people. That's the formation of the Ku Klux Klan. Mm-hmm. They don't call it that, but that's the Klan. And so they had to minimize those implications all throughout Gone with the Wind. And it still is a film that has trigger warnings all over the place and that affects people very strongly, despite the fact that it is one of the greatest movies ever made. Well, Birth of a Nation the same way.
I got to be honest with you. When I was a kid, the only reason why I watched Gone with the Wind was because of that word damn. I wanted to hear it. I had never seen anything like that in a movie. And when he finally said it, it was like, oh, my God.
And that's the least of it because and they kind of sleazed by it. You couldn't say damn, but here's the wink, wink, nod, nod that the production code and producer David O. Selznick went through. They said, we can put it in, but it's going to cost $5,000 as a fine. After all that back and forth over frankly, my dear, I don't care. My dear, I don't care. Frankly, I'll just pay $5,000 and get away with it. That's a kind of hypocrisy, but it gave us a classic.
Isn't this part of the reason why making a movie is a miracle? Because if you have to sit there and wait for the blue pencil people to come by and to look at your scripts before even production begins, it's like, my God, how does this thing even get done?
They were able to turn it around within 24 hours. Find many, many examples of we're going to be shooting this. Of course, in some cases, they shot the film and then they sent the script in. When Charlie Chaplin made the film Monsieur Verdoux, he pretended not to know that he had to submit the script beforehand. He shot his film. It was all done. Then he gave them the script. And there was a certain deference to Chaplin because he was using his own money. He said, Charlie, you're really supposed to give the script to us beforehand. And they insisted on changes. For example, when Charlie called a priest, my good man, they said, you can't say that. And Charlie said, but isn't a priest my good man? Yes, but it's condescending. Oh. And this was some of the back and forth on Monsieur Verdoux.
Can you imagine being inside that little boardroom when they're bringing up all these sentences? Because there's got to be somebody who's willing to cross the line, but then you're outvoted by those that are going, oh, I'm offended by this. How dare you?
That's what may happen today with the Classification and Rating Administration when they're talking about the rating of films. But as far as the censorship, they had so many censors working in the office, and the rules were very, very clear. Wow. Everything went out over the signature of Joseph Green, the director of the code, but they had about half a dozen people who were going through with fine-tooth combs, seeing what they could and couldn't do, according to the written code.
Is it your voice doing the audible? And the reason why I asked that question is because I want to be able to hear in your personal inflection and experience in doing this research how D.W. Griffith comes into play from 1916. I'm such an addict when it comes to pitch, volume, and tone, which brings out the emotion.
I wasn't trying to do a Kentucky accent, if you'll excuse me. Not even trying. But Griffith had a wonderful, wonderful voice, which you can hear in some of the interviews that he gave in the olden days. I do the audio book. It's coming out very, very soon from Bear Manor Audio, and it'll be available on audio and probably Blackstone Audio on CD. The interesting thing in reading it was I got to read the production code, which includes the N word, the K word, the A word, every word that you can imagine not saying in public now. But I had to read it, and we'll see what happens about that.
And the one thing that you really cover in this, and I want listeners to understand, this isn't just about movies. This is about books. This is about plays, costumes, and more. I mean, I never even thought about the costumes because, I mean, I grew up watching Mae West. Come on now. I mean, she had to have crossed the line.
She did, but she was before they started enforcing the code.
Oh, my God, of course, of course.
20th Century Fox seemed to have somebody in the code saying, you don't want to have these two low-cut gowns on Marilyn Monroe and people like that. Or in All About Eve, she has a small scene there. But this is a concern because you remember women went to the movies to see what the latest fashions were.
Yep.
That's how the fashions were spread throughout America. And to have something that was untoward would have thrown the fashion industry into a dither.
You talk about Stagecoach. That's my dad's movie, man. We can't be messing around with Stagecoach. I don't want to tell him what was censored.
It's a great film, but there was a concern about how Native Americans were treated in the movie.
That's it. Yep.
And yet John Ford, who has made so many Westerns, was the one who, when he heard there was starvation among the Navajo and others in Monument Valley, would conspire to make a film there and bring employment and bring food and bring relief to these people. He was given an official Navajo name. So, you can criticize Ford for a lot of things, but he also saved a lot of people. It's a complicated man and a very complicated story.
Well, now you bring me up to the modern day with Martin Scorsese with his most recent movie where they used actual Native Americans as well. I can't imagine what the censors were doing there to make sure he played the game right.
Well, remember, we haven't had censors since 1968. Really,
Right.
They just rate what's out there. What we have now is like and woke and cancel culture that picks up everybody, and that isn't in the book, and that's not something I'm going on the record with now. But I really think that it's probably time we recognize the real world out there. We can protect people just so much, but there is a real world out there, and people have to understand they must negotiate it.
God, I love the way that you allow yourself to be the student, then you become the researcher, and then you become the teacher and or archaeologist and share it with us. That is such an amazing journey that you're on, Nat.
Well, thank you, Arrow, but you got to understand that's what you do, too. You're absorbing all this information. You have a listenership that wants to know what you think about something, but you have to educate them as well as give your opinions. That's what we do in the media. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to educate people, enlighten people, and maybe give them a way to survive the confusing world we're in.
Wow. You got to come back to this show anytime in the future. You know for a fact that this door is always open, sir.
Well, as a matter of fact, next May, my publisher is bringing out the Rambo Report, which all about the Rambo films and the novels, and it's with the consultation and participation of David Morrell, the best-selling author who created Rambo in First Blood. We think that book is going to get some attention.
Yeah, well, I'll be seeing you next May then. I'm putting it on the calendar.
Thanks, Arrow. Have a good one, too.
You be brilliant today, okay?
You too. Thanks so much.